Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islam in Life with me, Raza Kazim. Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been funding Western universities. Considering that there is a great need for infrastructure in Muslim countries for schooling as well as academic development, how can this funding, which smells of Westoxication, be justified?
Over the past decade, Saudi Arabia has been the largest source of donations from Islamic states and royal families to cash-strapped British universities, much of which is devoted to the study of Islam, the Middle East and Arabic literature. A large share of this money went towards establishing Islamic study centres. These include top universities like Oxford and Cambridge. A similar trend can be found in the United States. According to Campus Watch, the story of the Saudi donations in the United States dates back to 1976, when Riyadh transferred $1 million to the University of Southern California. In 1979, Saudi Aramco World Magazine published a list of Middle Eastern gifts, including $200,000 from the Saudis to Duke University for a program in Islamic and Arabian development studies, amongst others. Until that time, Riyadh had spent $100 billion to spread Wahhabism. Surely this spells threat for the world's top academic institutions' independence, and if fundamentalist Wahhabi doctrine being taught in Western academic institutions, how can peaceful Islam and understanding of real Islam ever emerge?
We're honoured to be joined by our esteemed guest, Professor Tariq Ramadan, to discuss all of these issues. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. I wanted to start off by asking, why is there such enormous funding of Western universities that are given by Middle Eastern countries, for example, Qatar and Saudi Arabia? Why do you think that's happening?
I think first, this is not new. It's a very old tradition that you have, and it's not only the petromonarchies, but many other countries around the world. You have lots of things. Turkey is doing it, Morocco is doing it, Syria is doing it. So you have people putting money. Why? For two reasons. The first one is within the universities in the West, there are problems. They are always looking for money and looking for donators and having projects, and this is supported. And then there are countries that are going to put money for two reasons. First, it's sometimes that you have campuses that are coming from the States or more from the States than from Europe, and they are going to be established in the countries. You have this in Saudi Arabia, you have this in the Emirates, you have this in Qatar, you have this in other countries. So there is an exchange. You open campuses where there is a kind of an Americanization. So this is where you can ask yourself why the Muslim majority countries and the Arab countries are welcoming, and is it to help the standards to be higher, or are they checking what is taught on the campuses? That could be also sometimes very much a westernization of the culture. But this has to be checked. On the other side, the money that is given by the countries is out of good relation, and also to try to promote programs or to support programs that have to do with the Middle East and have to do with Islam, for example. So in principle, the best for me would be to be completely independent in every country. The reality now is that you have funding. So if you have this reality, and especially within academia, what is important is that when the money is given, who at the end is checking the independence of what is taught. So the endowment, for example, is you give the money and then you have no rights to enter and to interfere within the program.
But it's not as simple as that, because if surely you don't produce the academic research that the donor country wants to be produced, you're not going to get any such funding in the future. So you know that threat, the sword of money, is dangling over you.
It could be, yes, you are right. It could be that, so this is why it's very important for the university, for example, to be quite clear on what are the rules and what are the principles, that when you get the money, the people who are in charge of the position should be completely free to work, which is exactly my position, by the way, in Oxford, is that no one is interfering in all what I'm doing, and it has to be your academic independence and your own consistency and moral positioning by saying, I have this position, it was founded by a country, but whatever I'm going to say should be completely free and you should be able to criticize. So this is where you have something which is promoted by or financed by a country. But the point that you are making is right, is that sometimes within the university say we have to be cautious, because if you end up criticizing too much, they are not going to support you again. So that's a point where we have to be clear on every single project. And it happened that some, first financed a project and they stopped because it was not exactly what they wanted. And the second thing, which is important, is also the curriculum. What is taught, where what is important is to be clear on the fact that it has to be academically independent and it has to be serious and courageous at the same time, which is not always the case. Add to this a point that you were making at the beginning, is that what we would like to see more is within these countries a real strategy when it comes to academia. So why are we putting the money outside? Well, we have so much need inside the country when it comes to schools and academic institutions.
One of the things that actually happens, so you go about researching a particular area because funding has been provided for that area. What that then means, almost by default, is that you're not going to go and research something else for which you haven't got the funding, which perhaps merits research being done on it. So there is an issue around this funding actually impacting on the direction of research, and so therefore the narratives that are going to be coming out from academia that are going to influence governments, policies and so on as they roll down. Is that not in itself problematic in this?
But we have to differentiate. I agree with what you are saying. It depends if, for example, you have money coming from countries, it's for an endowment, it's for a position, professorship or researchship, whatever. If it's a professorship, for example, or if it's an area, and then the university, and only the university, this is the standard that you have in the States and in Europe, has the right to see what you are doing. So it's an area, for example, I'm teaching contemporary Islamic studies. It's wide, and it could be whatever I want, and no one is putting a pressure. This is something which is when it comes to an endowment. Now, when it comes to research and say we are supporting a program for 5 years, which is less than what they are doing, this is not really what it's coming from the States. Very often it's about position and centers. So the centers might have an area and might have a vision that it's, and then in this, it could be that there could be a direction given to the research. So this is where the Western universities, or the university outside, because by the way, it's not only in the West that we have a problem. African countries are dealing with the same problem. And Asian countries where the money is coming, who is going to decide what is going to do? So this is where the people who are getting the money should be clear on what they are going to do at the beginning and in which way they are going to work, because it could, as you said, have an impact on: are you going to be able to criticize? Are you going to be autonomous? Is it only to focus on a specific area and not to talk about specific issues, for example, that could be more problematic and sensitive? It could happen. So at the end, it's also for all the people who are getting the money to be quite clear on what they want and how they are going to work. There are some universities, it's very difficult, for example, to go to Cambridge or to go to Oxford or to go to Harvard and say, you know what, you don't speak about that. It's not going to work. And the production there, it's clearly not being constrained by, pressure and political pressure. It could be on some people, but the university in itself, the universities in itself are open and they are not ready to compromise on that.
Lots of interesting points. We do like to keep this show as interactive as possible and really value your opinion. Here's what you sent us this week.
This week we asked, what is the impact of Muslim fundamentalist states' funding of Western universities? Hisham from Denmark said, the impact is huge. If the top Western universities take on Islam that is the fundamentalist Salafi doctrine, the clash between Muslims and non-Muslims will only get bigger. Ali from USA said, how can the Western academics be trusted to come up with legitimate solutions to the threat of extremist Islamic ideology, when that's what they are fed right from the beginning? And Salma from Scotland said, the impact is obvious. Academic institutions in one era used to challenge politicians and hold them accountable for their harmful policies and associations. Now they are all fed from the same source, so they all bow down to Saudi money.
I think it should be for good purpose. I don't know what's the cause of these fundings and what they've been utilized for, but as far as what I'm aware of, if it's for the constructive purposes and for debate and for that's encouraging people to do some sort of positive work, so I think it should be encouraged as long as it's not being used for any negative purposes or propagated for their own sort of Western interests. So that's my take on this.
I think that money should go equally to other countries which really in need of those support, whether it's in Africa or in other Arab countries which really in need of support, financial support of their universities, of their people. Yeah.
To be honest with you, I'm very amazed about that, because you would expect all these rich Muslim countries to come out and help the poor Muslim countries, because they're Islamic brothers as well. And one would expect from them to come out and help them more. Wherever there's a troubles in the Islamic world or Islamic countries, you expect them to help them more. But I certainly think it's more to a commercial interest.
Well, they want sympathies. They want to get a lot of sympathies from these Western universities so they can impose their ideology.
That's all the comments we have for this week. If you'd like to have your views featured in the show, be sure to follow us on Facebook or join us on Twitter. Now you can send your own videos with your comments and even your questions to islamandlife@presstv.com.
There's a lot of cynicism in the comments that are being made about what's happening with that money. Some of it a perception, but pandering to a reality that perhaps exists in some other ways. I mean, how would you respond to that?
I would be cautious with this, because this impression is, you know, the influence of Wahhabism or the Salafi literalist is not going to go through the academic institution. That's not true. Whatever you have, like money, for example, coming from the Saudi, this is not what they want. They don't want.
Why is that? Why do you say that? Because
that's not the case. That's not the case. Look at all the institutions that are, you know, financed by, you know, Saudi, Qatari, and Emirati money. They are not promoting Salafism. That's not true. Quite sometimes the opposite, by the way. Sometimes you ask yourself, they are supporting very secular institutions, very secular, and people who have nothing to do with, you know, this very narrow understanding. So within academia, some of the institutions are even sometimes, you know, promoting and having people who are not even Muslims, and they are very far from being Muslims, and sometimes very critical. So on this, and this...
But doesn't, sorry to interrupt, but doesn't that kind of like sum up that to classify Saudi Arabia as a Wahhabi state or whatever, something that promotes it, is kind of problematic, because they have no concept of religion or morals or principles. That they will do whatever they need to do in terms of how they're reacting.
Yes and no. The problem is that we on the political side and the academic side and financing, we have to be very cautious. Not everything that is financed by Wahhabi states is going to be Wahhabi. So you can say it's a way of, you know, at the end they want to please the West and they want to please the state. When it comes to give us the money, they will give. But it's not always like this. So there are projects, and there is money put in projects and in institutions. So I don't think, you know, from Georgetown to Harvard to Cambridge and all these great universities, they are not promoting Salafis because they got the money. That's not true. That's not true on the ground. The problem is not this. The problem is, so when they get the money, what are they doing and how are they going to deal with this? Is this a way of, for them to be independent? I don't think that the independence here, so the problem here is the financial economic relationship that at the end is supporting the Saudi to work not within academia in that way, but to work outside, for example, and some of the governments are working outside. So I would say it's within the mosques. It's with the literature that they are publishing. This is where you can see the Salafi. So you have to be very cautious not to think the Salafi is coming from academia. That's not true. But the Salafi ideology, it's elsewhere. But the position of power is that these people and these governments are giving money here and there. So that's the problem. And we have to have a bigger picture here, and especially with the Saudi.
Yeah. One of the things that we see in the way the British government operates is to actually provide some kind of money for a particular project and goes in a particular direction and carries on going in that particular direction. But then when it wants to, it brings those people out who are going to be able to say certain things about it because they're so engrossed in that project itself that they don't see the bigger picture. So some of these people who are engrossed in the project can actually say how wonderful things are on whatever it is that they're researching to do with Islam in Saudi Arabia or Qatar or whoever. But actually, they're missing the point. So it's useful to use those academics and have those academics used without them actually knowing that this is happening.
I think you are right that some of, within academia and some of the scholars are like that, and they are very cautious with the political issue. And at their level, they would say, that's all fine. This is what is happening. They don't have the big picture. But by the way, with or without all these states, we have professors and researchers that are doing exactly the same. They just want to acknowledge the fact it's good, while the big picture is not as good as this one. So I would say yes, but this depends sometimes on the researchers and the professors. So I would say that this is where, in principle, just to put all the people at the same level and saying it's going to happen anyway, I think it's not always right. You have to take case per case and understanding that there is a big picture. There is a strategy here and why they are taking the money and why, for example, they might be very silent when they get the money and very vocal when it comes to criticize the country, to put the country in a situation of weakness in order also to say, okay, look, we are helping you, so you better support our project. It's sometimes very cynical the way all things are doing, and I would say that our position here, I would take, and I'm taking in every situation when it comes to this, a position of principle, which is transparency and consistency in what we are saying, and to be clear that within academia, no one should prevent you from speaking the truth and speaking the way you want to speak.
This knowledge production that is going on influences policies, influences governments, influences ordinary people, eventually as it trickles down in terms of impact. Now, how is the ordinary person supposed to be able to differentiate? Is there a blueprint by which they can see to what extent what is being said needs to be considered in the lens of that prejudice that might exist or may not exist? How do you discern?
I think you are right, it's very difficult. And at the end, you are not always aware of, the political game. And I would say the assessment should be, are they free to speak their mind on all the topic, or are they avoiding? And especially avoiding the topic of the country that gave the money, for example. If you are avoiding it and you are not critical, it means that there is a problem. There is a problem. It would be, for example, we know the situation of the migrant workers in Qatar, for example. I have a position. There is an endowment at the University of Oxford. No one is going to prevent me from speaking the truth about what is happening and say you have to improve. That's not going to work like this, that there is something which is unacceptable. And when it comes to the alliances with Israel or the alliances with Western forces or the United States of America, you should be critical. If at the end you can't be critical because you have this position, it means we are not dealing with academia, we are dealing with political game and influence. At the end, they are using you to support their policy. And if a position is created to support the policy of the country, that's the end of academia. You cannot accept that. You have to be quite clear that you speak your mind, you do what you have to do, and you have to show courage. Because at the end of the day, even if there is no money coming after this, the very essence of this money for a position, an academic position, is academia, meaning free speech, free critical thinking.
In terms of actually having some kind of an alternative to these attempts by universities that are, involved with getting all of this money and so on and so forth, is there an alternative possibility to this reality that exists, or are we forever going to be tied down with having these question marks about where the money is coming from, what's actually going to be influenced?
No, but
and so on?
it was always like this. You had money coming in and out. The problem is that is not going to change by saying, the Western universities are going to be self-funded and self-financed no, that's an exchange. And the problem is that even, as I said, you have other countries putting money, and even poor countries are putting money in some universities. You can have a country coming from the African country and putting money to create a center, for example, of African studies. You have this. So what are we going to say is that by principle, no way, we don't want this, or you put some conditions when it comes to, okay, we can do this, except with the conditions that the university is going to check on the academic level and the academic substance, no interference, freedom for the researchers or for the professors. You put some conditions, so it might happen that at the level of the states they are helping one another, but what the academic world and the academic institutions should do is to put the condition of the work that they are doing. And some are doing this, and on the ground you can see that the universities are not promoting the ideology of the country. Quite the opposite. They are letting the professors and the researchers being critical. This is happening in the West. It will happen in African country. But it's very difficult to think about a world where you don't have this kind of support, and especially within academia today. What would be the best today is to see Muslim majority countries putting much more money in their own education, and not to westernize their own education by bringing, specialists from the West when they have the potential to do it themselves.
Should there be an obligation, very quickly, on Western universities to not actually take money from poor countries, let's say?
No, once again, why not? Once again, it's exactly the same. I wouldn't ask the European or the rich university to take money. I would like the governments to give much more money to others. Once again, I understand what you mean. Corrupt regime financing. Yes, on this, I would say we have to go to be very strict with this. It doesn't mean that all the projects should be rejected, but some of the regime, you don't even think of taking money from them.
Lots of interesting points. The funding of research in Western universities creates potential structural biases, both in terms of the direction of the research undertaken, as well as the results of the research. The output that is produced from any of these universities needs to be scrutinized for the influence that Saudi and Qatari money has brought to bear on outputs. The influencing of the narratives that Western figures of authority put out will influence how people will interact with the world realities based on their perception of realities. That's all the time we have today. I would like to thank Professor Tariq Ramadan for joining us, and I thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.